Okay, so now I would like to pass it back to Cindy to do our introduction.
Thank you, Rob. International filmmaker and pro-life speaker Kevin Dunn has traveled to several countries filming testimonials from those most affected by assisted dying laws, patients, doctors, lawyers, caregivers, philosophers, and journalists who have seen the inherent danger in giving physicians, or anyone for that matter, the legal right to end the life of another human being. More recently, Kevin's work underscores the need for each of us to become prophets of hope in the lives of those around us. It is our great pleasure to have Kevin with us tonight. Please welcome Kevin Dunn.
Hey, thanks so much, Cindy, and thank you, Rob. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. Can you hear me okay? Give me a thumbs up, or are we good? All right, so we got lots of thumbs up there. That's great. Well, before I begin, because really, I had no idea I would be doing this. I mean, maybe filmmaking, because I've always thought, at least when I was a youngster, my dad was a TV guy. He was in the studios, and he did all sorts of television work. So that part I knew, but I had no idea at this point that I would be doing films on euthanasia, of all things, and medical aid in dying. I mean, oh my goodness. What I would rather be doing, of course, is important work, but what I would rather be doing is actually playing my guitar. And because that's my go-to. That's my go-to, music, and sharing the gift of music. And when I was talking to Rob earlier tonight, or earlier yesterday, Rob was saying that he has traveled. He's been everywhere. And so when I was thinking about Rob, you're telling me about where you've been, I had to play you one verse of "He's been everywhere, man. He's been everywhere." The guy has traveled everywhere, and I love that old tune. So I was singing it. I was singing it last night after we had our conversation. But I will play you one little bit, and this goes out to Cindy and everybody at Thunder Bay Life. Because this is really, really what it's all about. I don't know if you know the old James Taylor song, how sweet it is to be loved by you. How sweet it is to be loved by you. I needed the shelter of someone's arms. There you were. I needed someone who understand my ups and downs. There you were. With sweet love and devotion, deeply touching my emotion. I want to stop and thank you, baby. I just want to stop and thank you, baby. You can sing along. How sweet it is to be loved by you. One more time. Right where you are. How sweet it is to be loved by you. There's a little music to start our night. I always like to do that. It always puts me in the mood before I begin to talk. And so thanks to James Taylor, one of my favorite artists, for putting that together. Was that okay? Was that all right? Okay, good. I'm going to share a screen now, and I'm going to start the presentation. And here we go. Share screen and open my PowerPoint. Press my PowerPoint. Where is it now? And let's see here. I think we got it almost. And what are you looking at? Does that look good? It should be okay. I can't. What are you looking at? Are you looking at a full screen, or can you see my notes? Are we good to go? You're looking at a full screen? Okay. All right. Good to go then. So here we go. Filmmaker's journey, prophets of hope. That's what it's all about. I've been producing for a long time. I had a blast producing for such networks as Discovery Channel, History, CTV, Global. But most recently, as Cindy alluded to, I've been kind of taking on a human rights focus with my films. We did the Euthanasia Deception in 2016 with the Euthanasia Prevention Coalition. Fatal Flaws 2018, again with the Euthanasia Prevention Coalition, because as you know, that was around the time those laws were coming into being, coming into place. And then the National March for Life, I've been doing for the past 10 years with EWTN in Ottawa. And as you can see there, Abby Johnson, and interview with Abby, wonderful, a few years ago, just blew the house, blew the roof off the house. It was amazing. She did such an amazing job. And of course, Stephanie Gray, who many of you know. So I've had a wonderful, but challenging and very rewarding opportunity to work in the pro-life movement in the film and media capacity. And as I've gone along, I've collected a number of pro-life stories that deal with the sacredness of life from conception until natural death. You know, we'll start at the conception side. You know, we all know as Christians, we all know actually as a society that life begins at conception. Science proves it. I'm not telling you anything new. We have a unique DNA right from the moment we are conceived in our mother's womb, you know, right from that special moment. And of course, life carries on. You know, I think of my own conception. We don't often think about it, but being conceived in our own mother's womb. And then of course, later on, our own families. I think of I'm the father of 6 wonderful children. You know, I call them my biggest production, my family. I'm the father of six wonderful children and sequels. And you know, isn't that what it's all about? Promoting and protecting and passing on the gift of life to future generations. You know, if the family is the vital cell of society, we have to do everything we can to protect it. And isn't that what it's all about? I look at my wife, Mary, you know, besides being an amazing mother, she's a nurse who's worked in hospitals and for family physicians. Over the years as in the medical profession, she's confronted with patients dealing with all sorts of life issues, contraception, abortion, now euthanasia. This is not an easy life for people in the medical profession who have to deal with life issues on a day-to-day basis. Very, very difficult. And now you've got the whole situation of conscience rights, where a doctor can't even use his or her own conscience in deciding on the best form of treatment for the patient, because if the patient wants euthanasia or the patient wants an abortion, you know, they have to refer, which is being complicit. It's a scary time, but also a challenging time. Over years, as I say, this story, and I'm struggling here because it's not my story to share, it's hers, but she's given me permission to share this story with you because it's an incredible story. I can tell you this is a credible journey of ours. Before I met my wife, at the age of 16, she had an unplanned pregnancy. And she decided that she would place her baby for adoption. I mean, at a very, very vulnerable age, she chose adoption for her baby boy. Other than her family, nobody else knew, and she really, really wanted to keep it that way. And soon I would meet Mary. I was smitten, and we fell in love. And she shared her secret with me, and I loved her even more for it. I remember asking her what thoughts she might have, and what thoughts went through her mind at the time, how she decided on adoption. And she shares how at 11 years old, she saw a poster of aborted fetuses and remembers saying to herself, I don't know what that is, but I will never do that. As time went on, she realized what that image was and what the word abortion meant. I'm always amazed at her courage, her faith, her sacrifice in placing her child for adoption. She tells me how after the adoption, she just pressed those feelings, those memories down deep in her heart. We got married. We would pray for the little guy throughout the years as we raised 6 kids of our own, each one of them a gift, a miracle in their own right. 28 years into our marriage, an unexpected miracle took place. Are you following me so far? Because this one is a connecting of dots that can only happen with a little bit of heavenly intervention. 33 years after Mary chose adoption for her baby boy, she was on a weekend away with some lady friends, one who shared a similar story. Her name is Anita. And Anita's okay with me telling this story too. Mary had a real bond with Anita, and she decided she would share her story with her. You see, Anita had not only chosen adoption for her baby girl, she also had reunited with her. And back and forth they went. Mary telling the story about how she placed her baby son up for adoption. Anita, how she placed her baby girl up for adoption. And back and forth they went. And while Mary was sharing the details of her story, Anita started asking more questions like, what was his birthday? What was the hospital? Where did she stay? Things like that. Mary shared the story of the home for young pregnant women where she stayed. And as she shared, she could see the amazement in Anita's eyes. And Anita, who had just met her birth daughter, Anita had just met her birth daughter. She pulled out the picture of the first time she met her birth daughter. And here's where it gets really interesting. That day, Anita's daughter had brought her brother along to the reunion, a brother who was also adopted, a brother who had an unmistakable resemblance to my wife, Mary. I remember how she showed me the picture for the first time, and my jaw dropped and we both wept like babies. As it turned out, both children, Anita's daughter and Mary's son, had grown up in the same family together. I know it's hard to believe. Mary's friend's birth daughter and Mary's birth son adopted into the same home and grew up as siblings. It would be over a year of emails until we met Mary's birth son in person. And here's a picture of Patrick. I still get choked up when I tell this story because it's amazing. It truly is amazing. What happens when we choose life, when we don't choose to settle for the feelings of today? So why am I telling this story to you? Well, who were the prophets of hope in your life? I mean, I think of the prophets of hope in this story, in Mary's story. You've got the doctors, you've got the nurses, you've got the support staff, you've got the healthcare community, home for pregnant women, the caregivers, the family, extended family, larger community supports. These are all prophets of hope. That's you, that's me. But what are we doing? What are we doing to become a prophet of hope so the Marys and the Anitas of this world feel there's hope for tomorrow? This is what the movement needs. This is what it's all about, becoming a prophet of hope in the lives of those. And then sharing our stories, like this story. This story is so powerful. We were able to share it at the March for Life a few years ago. When we share our brokenness, when we share these stories, people feel that it's okay. It's okay to share. It's okay to feel broken because we know as Christians, by our wounds, by his wounds, we are healed. By those wounds, we are healed. It goes both ways. We have to encourage others never to judge tomorrow based on the circumstances of today. And that is what's happening in today's society, especially in these days of pandemic, when we're so separated from loved ones and from that opportunity, from the larger opportunity to reach out. We have to encourage others never to judge tomorrow based on the circumstances of today. That's why this year at the March for Life, which I'm very much involved with, we chose the theme, "You Are Not Alone." And it resonated right across the country. So that was the conception story. I have many more stories to share with that on that pro-life side. But we're going to move into the other end of life because we know conception, life begins at conception, and we believe it is sacred from conception until natural death. But I find as I travel through the world and do these talks that many people, good-minded Christians, they're okay with that whole idea of conception, that life begins at conception, life is sacred at conception. But this whole natural death end is kind of like, it's a little foreign. It's like, well, I'm not sure because maybe I might be in that situation one day where I might a doctor to, end my life. So I don't want to decide on that. And so they remain neutral. And this is the time, this is why it's good that all of you are here tonight. All of you are listening because now is the time when we're relatively healthy to gird ourselves for those moments when we feel like our life is no longer worth living, because that's what it's all about. That is what it's all about. It's come with the introduction of assisted death, of euthanasia, of assisted suicide. In Canada, we know it's called medical aid in dying. Well, I'm telling you, even before this pandemic, there was a pandemic of fear that was robbing us of life on both ends of the spectrum. And it's only gotten worse as this pandemic has taken hold. People are actually asking for their lives to be ended because of fear of the future, because of loneliness. Isn't that a sad state? Isn't that a sad state? Man. So we've done a couple of films on this subject. I say we because Alex Schadenberg and I have become very close over the past 5 years. The first film we did was called The Euthanasia Deception, and that was in 2016. We went to Belgium, and that's where the 15-year experiment with euthanasia had gone terribly wrong. It's now 20 years, and it's even gotten worse. The second film we did looked at euthanasia and assisted suicide throughout the world, in Netherlands, in Belgium, in the USA, throughout Canada, where we asked the most important cultural question of our time: should we be giving doctors the right in law to end the life of another by euthanasia or assisted suicide? And what do these laws do to the culture over time? This is a relatively new, horrific experiment that the world is toying with. It's relatively new, although we've seen versions of it in the past, but that's a whole other story. Because this time we're asking for it. People are asking for it. So we felt the need to go and produce this film, of which Euthanasia Prevention Coalition, Alex, just a wonder. I mean, he was ringing alarm bells way before, but as a filmmaker, I felt really wanted to join forces. And Alex and I worked very well together to put this together, called Fatal Flaws. Here's the trailer for the film. Here. Whoop. Are you hearing audio or no?
Sorry, no audio there, Kevin.
Okay, let me just make sure that I'm all shop sharing, and then I'll do it again. Hey, everybody, how's it going?
Going good.
All right, I'm gonna do it again, and I'll. So for sure, you were looking at the right screen. You didn't see any of my presenter notes there. I just want to be sure of that, because that would be very.
Only for a moment.
Only for a moment. Okay, very good. Because I didn't want to include that with the film, especially. So here we go. I will just. Sorry, things were going along so well.
Oh, it's going
Share
amazing.
sound.
It's going awesome. I'm seeing lots of
All
comments.
right.
I don't know if you can see the comments, Kevin. People are very touched.
Oh, good. I'm glad. Well, now we can take a break because we can have our nice little mug here. We can have a drink.
Ooh, speaking of mugs.
This is pretty sweet. You have to get your own. I'd turn it and show you the little label on the bottom, but I put water all over me.
Oh, well, I can
All
do
right,
that.
so we're gonna run the trailer. Here we go, and play. Are you looking at a screen? Are you looking at a full screen?
Yeah, looking at full screen now.
Okay, here we go.
Welcome to Death with Dignity.
I've never been welcomed to Death with Dignity before.
For the past 2 years, I've traveled to 4 different countries on a quest to see what effects euthanasia and assisted suicide laws have on individuals and society.
This is an issue that's about making the medical professional more comfortable with killing people.
There's no killing going on. It's a request of a patient to take his or her life by their own doctor.
If you were just to replace the image of the needle or the pill with the gun, I think that would make a much more vivid picture of something that would be transculturally wrong.
One side says that these laws will protect us.
Just 10 seconds before I put the injection in, I say, look in the eyes and I say, is this what you really want?
The other says we've gone too far.
So it's the only procedure that I have at my disposal in this state where I'm protected completely from civil or criminal liability, and I don't even have to fill out any paperwork.
Boundaries of euthanasia in the Netherlands seem to be blurred, and the situation seems to be shifting.
Who's telling the other side of the story?
I'm afraid no one.
We're heading into a tipping point in the assisted suicide issue in the U.S.
You've given the government the power to decide who can die. It can morph to how you look, how you think, what your politics are. It's very dangerous.
He was very politely asking me if I wanted to die, and he would have made it happen.
If I had to go ahead and do what the doctors wanted me to do, I wouldn't have had her.
What was that?
Well, they wanted me to do assisted suicide death on her.
I have a death wish for about 6 years, and I've tried to get euthanasia for about 4 years, and I don't get it.
You don't get it.
And I just want to fight for it.
I have to ask the question, who has failed her? I want to give you a big hug.
You may.
Okay, good.
At the moment they gave her the injection, they said they gave it so that she could go to sleep. But in fact, they just killed my mother.
It's like being a lawyer for the defense and the lawyer for the prosecution in the same courtroom. And if you're not bothered by that, I'm also the executioner.
Is it murder?
Well, it's murder on request. Like physician-assisted suicide. It's a suicide with help.
Not once did she ever say to them, I want to end my life.
What did you say?
I don't want to. Don't cry. It's all done now, it's over. Yeah.
Sorry, Kevin, I muted you during the video. Can you unmute?
Yeah, so thanks. So after we completed the film, we sent it out for some reviews. And one of the first reviews that came back was from Stephen Sharfstein, who's the former president of the American Psychiatric Association. And he said, you know, Kevin, the euthanasia movement is trying to redefine the ethics of medicine. And I thought, what a profound statement that is, because that is what was happening all over the world. And here you have a very high profile person, very worried about what this ethos is bringing to the medical profession. So I want to introduce you to Candace Lewis. And Candace lives in Newfoundland. We traveled out to see her. And no matter where I travel, actually, people who live with disabilities are at the forefront of opposing these laws. Candace was born with spina bifida and cerebral palsy. I interviewed her for Fatal Flaw. She's been in and out of hospital her whole life. And here's the story. Here's the setup to the clip. One night when Candace was very sick in hospital, Sheila's mom said not one, but two doctors not only suggested, but were trying to coerce both Sheila's mother and Candace into having Candace have medical aid in dying. They were worried, they were concerned she was going to die, and they thought this was the way out. And here's what happened.
If I had to go ahead and do what the doctors wanted me to do, I wouldn't have had her.
What was that?
Well, they wanted me to do assisted suicide death on her.
This is your story. You said a couple of things on the CBC News story. I remember they said, did you want to die? And what did you say?
I don't want to. She got sick here at home. We got the ambulance. When we got her to the hospital, she was having seizures. They had to give her medication, take her heart rate down. Her heart rate was very high, talking 170. This doctor that was seeing her first, and he came in and he told me that her kidney wasn't in the right spot. He told me the lower parts of her lungs had collapsed, so they admitted her. And the next day, when he came in, he took me out in the hallway and he just stood me up against the wall and he told me about assisted suicide death was legal in Canada. And I said, well, he asked, did I know? And I said, no. And then he said, he was all for it. And I said, well, that was your choice. And I told him I wasn't interested in anything to do with assisted suicide death. And he told me, he said, I was being selfish. And he wanted to assist me in doing this. And I said, I'm not interested. I more or less walked away from her. She heard everything. And
You heard what the doctor said?
Yeah.
How did that make you feel?
not feeling good. Like not once did she ever say to them, I want to end my life. Not once.
You said they talked about it a lot. Did they talk about it a lot with you?
Yeah. And this doctor came in and next day after he told me about the assisted suicide death and stuck his face down in hers and said, do you know how sick you are? And I'm just like, and when I got his eyes contact, I went my eyes like that to get out in the hallway, and I told him, I said, don't you ever pull something like that again.
So at that time, were you worried that Candace was going to die?
They had told me that she was dying. I believed them. They were the doctors, and she was so sick. But I told her if she wanted to go, it was good. She could go. But she didn't. Don't cry, honey. But she didn't want me to be alone. Don't cry. It's all done now. It's over. We just don't want it to happen to anybody else, hey? No. Don't want another family to go through this.
So, Candace, who was the prophet of hope in her life? Who was the prophet of hope? Obviously, it was her mother. Had she not been there, who knows? And you know, it's actually against the law as it stands for a doctor to suggest that. But you know, in some cases, in some places right now, the law is being discussed. It's actually going to be part of the treatment option that the doctor can, at your lowest point, say, is this something you want? Who was the prophet of hope? Well, this is the whole question. We need more prophets of hope out there, because when it comes down to it now, a year later, Candace was escorting her sister down the aisle at her sister's wedding. And it's interesting, when I talked to Mom, Sheila, she says that when she was pregnant with Candace and her twin sister, the doctors were talking to her about aborting because of spina bifida. And here 25 years later, they're in the same hospital room and they're talking about euthanasia. I mean, it's coming in from both sides now, folks. So we need prophets of hope to get out there, to be informed, and to act as supports. Mark Davis Pickup, he's from Edmonton, another Canadian story, great story of a gentleman. Mark was diagnosed with multiple sclerosis at the age of 35. Listen to what he says about how he was feeling at the time.
I was diagnosed with MS when I was 30. At the 2 to 3 year point, my grief was so deep, my heartache was so sharp, that my thinking became clouded. And if there had been a Jack Kevorkian back in the mid-1980s, I can see that I might have opted for that option. I'm so glad today that it did not happen, because I never would have known my grandchildren. You see, the difficulty with making that decision is we're not really sure what tomorrow is going to bring. We make a decision based on the grief of today. I would have, yes, if I hadn't been surrounded by the support and the love of my wife and my children and my faith community and my God, I can see that I would have opted for assisted suicide.
30, 40 years later, there's the interesting side note. In 2019, Mark was able to walk again. Okay, this is 30 years after. Well, he's overjoyed. He writes in his blog, I have to accept whatever happens and rest in the providence of God, trusting there is a reason for this unexpected but thrilling development. If I can walk, I will use it part of my Christian witness. If I lose the ability to walk and return to my wheelchair, I will use the experience as part of my Christian witness. These are the prophets of hope we need. Either way, I will praise God. He has been with me, sustained me throughout this 35-year journey. But today I think I'll saunter down the hallway again, he says. God bless you, Mark, and God bless you for sharing that story, because that gives us all hope. Mark Comrade is a doctor. Remember, I mentioned the American Psychiatric Association earlier. I met Mark in Baltimore and had this really interesting interview with him. Now, Mark was one of the key writers, the key authors of a historic paper from the American Psychiatric Association, who basically denounced euthanasia, assisted suicide, for psychiatric reasons. and said it should never be part of medicine. It should never be part of the healing. Doctors should never be killers. They should always be healers. Have a listen to what he says.
Of all places to come to the medical profession and say, we'd like for you to specifically douse that flame of life, that is an anathema to the medical profession. If you were just to replace the image of the needle or the pill with the gun, I think that would make a much more vivid picture of something that I think we can agree would be transculturally
Very, very
wrong.
powerful clip from Dr. Mark Comrade. And I really suggest you have a listen to his whole thing in the Euthanasia Deception.
Of all places.
This is Dr. William Toffler from Oregon. Now, Dr. William Toffler, he oversees the paradox that comes with asking doctors to end the life of a patient. Listen to how well he speaks. And it's worth writing down a couple of these little tidbits if you're ever trying to apologize, if you will, give the apologetics for why doctors should never be in the business of ending the lives of their patients.
My job as a doctor is to alleviate their suffering. It's not to be a vending machine when they make a good, rational argument that they'd be better off dead. It's like being a lawyer for the defense and the lawyer for the prosecution in the same courtroom. Am I arguing for the health and well-being to extend life as long as is reasonable? Or am I advocating for their early demise because after all, they're going to die anyhow? And then, by the way, if you don't think that's a conflict of interest, I'm also the judge to decide which argument's the best. And if you're not bothered by that, I'm also the executioner. There are about 200 doctors in the state of Oregon who believe they can keep all that conflict of interest straight. It's a delusion. If society is going to do this, if they believe that situational killing is the right answer for some illnesses, diseases, some points in life, then it should be someone outside of the house of medicine to avoid that inherent conflict of interest. Because after all, up until recently, there is no crystal ball reading course in medical school. And I say up until recently because for the first time in my university, in my department, some of my colleagues were teaching young doctors in training how they go about ending their patients' lives.
I mean, how crazy is that? But here he is speaking, you know. I'm the judge, I'm the jury, and I'm the executioner. That's what doctors are being called to do when they're asked to do this. So here are the deceptions that we walked away with, if you will, from doing Euthanasia Deception and Fatal Flaws. One, deception. It's all about autonomy. How can it be about autonomy when so many people are involved? They say it's between the doctor and the patient, and yet families are involved, nurses, the community, even the undertaker. Our decisions don't operate in a vacuum. Autonomy means I can move myself from here to here. I can will myself from here to here, walk, or wheel my wheelchair. That's autonomy. But when you involve a doctor, all of a sudden autonomy flies out the window because now you're asking a doctor to end your life. And that person is responsible. And the nurse who has to prepare, and the pharmacist. It's not autonomy, folks. And they say it's about compassion. Well, look up the word compassion. Compassion means to walk with, to journey with, never to give up hope. So 1 and 2 out the window. Number 3, they say safeguards will protect us, so don't worry about it. Well, my goodness, all you have to do is look at Bill C7 that was passed in March 2021, extending MAID to those whose death is not reasonably foreseeable, and extending MAID to those with serious mental illness. I want to tell you about mental illness. When I was in the Netherlands in 2018 to film Fatal Flaws, they had a thing called Euthanasia Week where they were actually promoting this for psychiatric reasons alone. Death not reasonably foreseeable, but just because of not just because I don't want to downplay, because psychiatric situations some of them are horrible, but are they a rationale for society now to end the life of those with psychiatric issues and psychiatric illnesses? The young woman I met, her name was Aurelia. She was at a youth symposium. Imagine that, a youth symposium discussing euthanasia during Euthanasia Week. They were pushing the completed life rationale, that whole idea, if they agreed that people should have a self-chosen death if they felt their life was complete, or for whatever reason they wanted to die. And I met this woman, and her name was Aurelia. And Aurelia, as you saw in the trailer, she wanted to die, but her GP would not let her. She said, he said, you should cope. You can cope. Please cope. While I was editing the film, I received word that her request had been granted by the End of Life Clinic, and that a clinic that operates outside the healthcare system was going to do it. Now, we got in contact with each other, and I interviewed her one time. She's in the film. I pleaded with her that the world was a better place with her in it. I did not propose to know the kind of suffering that she was going through with her psychiatric illness. I don't. But when we cross that line, we crossed a line that only by God's grace could we ever move back from. When we start saying life is not worth living past a certain point or with certain conditions, man, we've really treaded into horrific territories. And I'm sorry, folks, we are in that situation now in Canada, because there was a media circus when she had her euthanasia. There was everybody was, you go, girl, autonomy rules the day. Performers came to see her before she died, and she was not well, but she was very alert, had a group of friends. I don't know how long she would have lived. She said that she would have committed suicide anyway. But again, this is a woman with very serious illness, and she died at the hands of a doctor before the end of the film came out. Broke my heart. I called my priest. I said, should I fly over there? Like, what can I do? It was a fait accompli. It was a terrible situation. 2 weeks after I did my last Skype interview with her, a doctor had lethally injected her. All I can say is rest in peace, Aurelia. Why do people ask for death? Well, we know. And even the other side of the debate knows this is true. It's fear of losing autonomy, fear of future suffering, future pain, fear of becoming a burden. These are the top three reasons. And I ask you, what is the common denominator with all three of those? Yeah, fear. And I look at the good book, and what does Jesus say? More times than any other phrase in the New Testament, be not afraid. But how do we be not afraid? How do we get over our fear of losing our autonomy, our fear of what is to come, our fear of becoming a burden? We do that by becoming prophets of hope, by allowing prophets of hope to come into our life when we are down. And so I challenge you. But before I do, I want to clear up one thing. What we learn when we're doing these films, where does physical pain fall on the list? If those are the top three, fear. Well, 25% on the list of reasons. Like about 25 down on the list. Down, 25. You've got pain, actual physical pain. Not up here, but down here. So makes all the sense in the world that, well, it's up here then why the people are asking. At the time of the request, though, even that where it fell on like 20 to 25 on the list, at the time of the request, the pain level was 2 out of 5. This is from Oregon. So when they were asking for euthanasia, assisted suicide in the US, it was 2 out of 5, the pain level. So it's about fear of future suffering. So what do we do? We have to address better pain management, and we have to address better palliative care and specialists. That's what we have to do, because the top three reasons are fear. Never forget that. Fear and autonomy versus the medical establishment. Look at all these associations. Look at all of them. These are all against assisted suicide and euthanasia. And yet we think we know better. We think we know better as a society, and we start enacting these laws. So the question I ask you tonight is, can I be a prophet of hope to someone? Think about who the prophet of hope is in your life. Who is that person that pulls you out when you are down? Maybe it's a husband, maybe it's a wife, maybe it's a daughter, a son, an uncle, an aunt, a friend. That person you know you would have a lot of trouble living without. Can I be that someone to somebody else? Perhaps a stranger, perhaps somebody in a nursing home, perhaps somebody in a home for women with unplanned pregnancies. You know, who could I be that precious hope for? Perhaps someone with special needs. We have to encourage others. Never judge tomorrow based on the circumstances of today. I think of this woman, Jeanette Hall. Jeanette, I spoke to her when we were filming Fatal Flaws. Jeanette, she had a terrible cancer. She was diagnosed with serious rectal cancer. At the time, she would have qualified for Oregon's assisted suicide law, and she wanted it, particularly because she didn't want her hair falling out. But her doctor, Dr. Ken Stevens, whom I interviewed in the film, said she didn't believe in assisted suicide, reminded her she had a son graduating from police school the following year, and asked her if she would take treatments. And she agreed. Of course, her hair did fall out, but as you can see, she made the graduation. Now, she wasn't feeling well the day we were supposed to interview her, but we spoke to her on the phone, and she said to me, "Kevin, I'm so grateful to be alive. So happy Dr. Stevens did not listen to me when I asked him for assisted suicide." She said, "Kevin, that was 20 years ago. I'm so grateful to be alive." She made it through. She is a survivor. What a story. Remember Jeanette Hall, when you are at your lowest, there is always hope. There's always hope, and there is always a reason for living. Another hopeful story that came out of the Netherlands was Helen Isherwood. Helen's otherwise 93-year-old healthy mother had a fall, went into hospital. Doctors said she had an intestinal blockage as well. They began to withdraw food and beverage. Helen's mother told the nurse she didn't want to live like this anymore. They took that as a request for euthanasia and started the process moving. Helen, who was not invited to the meeting with her mother, said, "Hang on." She fought for a second opinion. And then the palliative care specialist was brought in. The palliative care specialist arrives, gives this woman some food, some water. They found there was no blockage. Helen's mom gets better and lives for 2 more years in a nursing home, long enough to meet her 3rd great-grandchild, and long enough for a family reunion, which would have never happened. And talk to those palliative care specialists out there and the nurses who deal with end-of-life issues. Those moments at the end of life can be the healing balm that will last generations, but it is cut off when the autonomous nature, or the so-called autonomous nature of euthanasia kicks in. I want death, I want it now. The family, it's not a good situation. I've interviewed so many people on this. Those final moments are ones of incredible healing and forgiveness between family members. One of my favorite prophets of hope, as I kind of wind up my talk here, is Dr. Benoit Bouslink. He's an oncologist from Belgium who shares this story of hope.
72-year-old patient was suffering breast cancer, and indeed she had been treated for several years, and the therapy was not so efficient anymore. So I went to see her. I took half an hour to talk to her, to listen to her, and I asked her, "Why are you asking for euthanasia?" "Well, this therapy is too heavy for me, and I don't want to be a burden for my family." Then I told her, indeed, this therapy is too heavy for you. It's not helping you anymore. We can stop it. It's not a problem to stop it. And then, concerning the burden for your family, in fact, her daughter was present in the room. I told her, "Well, did you take care once in your life for someone?" And she said, "Yes, my father was sick during 5 years, and I took care of him at home when he was ill during that period. And then when he died, my mother became ill, and I took care of her during 6 months." And I asked her, well, was this heavy for you to take care? Was this a burden for you? Oh no, it was such a pleasure to take care of them. I was so happy to do so. And before I could say, well, now this is the moment then maybe that others can take care of you and feel happy to take care of you, the daughter took the feet of the patient, started crying and told, Mommy, let me please take care of you now. And the question for euthanasia was solved. There was no question anymore, no demand anymore. And so if you can see that you can help persons to live their death in a good way or their disease in a good way, well, this is for me very grateful.
I remember when my dad was battling cancer, we were driving in the car to one of his oncology appointments, and he said to me, he said, Kevin, I feel like I'm such a burden. You should be working. I remember saying to him, Dad, I won't remember this day of work, but I will remember these times, these conversations, these prayers, these laughs, and these tears. These are the visceral moments that make life worth living. I won't remember that day of work, but I will remember the time I spent with you. And I thank God every day he's a cancer survivor, and he would have never considered medical aid in dying. But I could see that, remember number 3 on the list? I could see burden starting to creep in as a kind of a desperate notion. No, we have to remain being those prophets of hope to our parents and to our friends, to strangers, because we might just be the reason for their tomorrow. If fear is driving the apparent need to end the life of another through abortion or assisted death, we have to drive away that fear with hope by becoming a prophet of hope. So I challenge you, and I challenge myself. We got to get out there. We have to visit nursing homes, home for people with special needs, crisis pregnancy centers. Have a coffee with your elderly parents. It's strange, but I've started doing that over the past couple of years with my mom and dad. I call it Saturday morning muffin visit, and obviously I've had a few. But they would look forward to it every Saturday, and they're in their 80s, late 80s, and yeah, it's that something to look forward to. It's that reason for tomorrow. You know, together, if we do this, and I know Thunder Bay is so strong in its pro-life movement. I talked to a few other speakers, and they always speak very highly of the group in Thunder Bay about raising up new prophets of hope, because that's what you are by tuning in tonight. I had no idea I'd be traveling all the world, or in this case, in my basement, speaking about these subjects. I mean, who really wants to talk about these issues of euthanasia assisted? Who wants to do that? Again, I'd rather be playing my guitar. I'd rather talk about hope. And you know, I'm going to end my little talk here with a story that came to me from my daughter. My daughter Kathleen, she was living in BC at the time. I'm near Hamilton, where you're listening to me now. So I had no idea she was doing this. And she posted this story on Facebook, and I want to read it to you. She says, every Friday morning, I've been spending an hour playing Scrabble with a lovely 93-year-old lady at a local care home. It's my simple way of helping the elderly find joy in their daily life. I'm always praying for opportunities to talk to her about God, or to simply show her that she is loved. And today that opportunity came in full force. After our game, she outright asked me, what do you think of doctor-assisted suicide? And pointed to an article from the paper on the topic. I told her, this is Kathleen's words, I told her I felt it very sad that anyone should feel the need to take their life. And it's our failure as a society when anyone is left feeling this way. After some time discussing this, she expressed to me that she can sympathize with people who don't feel they have a reason to live in their suffering, as she too often wonders why God still has her stuck in this wheelchair. With tears in my eyes, I was able to tell her what a joy she is to me, and that I look forward to visiting her every week. And she teared up as well, shock in her eyes, and said, really, is that true? I nodded, unable to get more words out. Well then, the old woman said, I guess there is reason enough for me to be here. Let us never underestimate the power of our presence and the lives of those around us, especially the vulnerable. Each of us can be a reason for someone's tomorrow. Thank you very much, everybody. It's been a pleasure chatting with you tonight.
Thank you, Kevin. Very moving. Your dedication to pro-life work and your honesty and your integrity is just very inspiring, and I want to thank you for being with us. Everything that I've read about you and heard about you is all true. You're wonderful to work with. It's been a real pleasure, and especially on the heels of the March for Life, I'm so grateful that you were able to give us some of your time for us here in Thunder Bay. So, and one of the other things that I'm sort of inspired by with you, and when I read about you and you telling the story about your daughter, is parents passing along that servant heart to their children, and that's something that I know that you have done with all your kids. So thank you for that. Feeling very grateful about that. I know that there was at least one question in the chat. Maybe Rob can